Great. Okay. All right, and we are, I think, officially live. So my name is Alli Crandell. I am the director of the Athenaeum Press and Digital Initiatives here within the Edwards College at Coastal Carolina University, and I am joined by my colleague, Scott Mann.
My name is Scott Mann. I'm a professor of graphic design and the art and production manager for the Athenaeum Press.
And so we're just going to tell you a little bit in terms of what the press is, and we are joined here by some of our amazing, talented alumni. So we are just going to give you a little bit of an overview, and we're just going to share a screen.
There we go.
Eventually.
You have to love technology.
Exactly.
All right. The Athenaeum Press was established in 2012 as an attempt to bring talented faculty and students together for design, digital media, and journalism. Up to this point, I counted it today, we've worked on a total of 14 completed projects. Our projects have small set of requirements. They must be regionally engaged. They must be both analog and digital. And at least one of our projects each year need to have a sellable component. So the press is not just a pedagogical experiment, they're deliverables. It has to be made. We try to make professional level, student-centered projects that are worthy of investments. This model accomplishes several things. There is a deadline. We have to think about creating a project that is both innovative and inviting, and both academically informed and accessible to the general readership.
And so the prep project process is really something that's kind of unique. We take a regionally inspired story, often from the Low Country, anything from Gullah spirituals to a one-armed photographer wandering around the back roads of Horry County. And we convene a team of interdisciplinary students together. And together they do everything from field work to design to conceptualizing what exactly that project is. And we have a lot of fun adventures along the way. We often get in a van and travel all around South Carolina and the Northeast. We go to places like DC and New York to figure out what exactly is the amazing ways of telling stories. And then the students decide what form that is going to take. That can be a museum exhibit, that could be an interactive VR documentary. It could be all variety of things. We haven't done interpretive dance yet, but to tell you a little bit about what exactly this process teaches our students, we're bringing you information directly from the source. So with that, we'd like to introduce our guest panel today.
All right. We are lucky enough to have 5 of our alumni here today to talk a little bit about their experience while at Coastal Carolina University and a member of the press team. And hopefully they'll be able to tell us a little bit about what they're doing now. In no particular order, we have Drew Smith. He graduated in 2018 with a Bachelor of Arts degree in graphic design and a minor in new media and digital culture. He is currently a concept creator for the innovation team at Converse in Cambridge, Massachusetts.
And also we have with us Shonte Clement, who's our most recent grad. She earned her bachelor's in digital culture and design in fall of 2019, and she's currently applying for grad school and is currently based in Charlotte, North Carolina. We're really excited to have her today.
Next, we have Nick McKinney. He's a graduate in 2015 with a Bachelor of Arts in philosophy. He's currently the director of the Looney Museum and exhibit designer for the Bertha Lee Strickland Cultural Museum in Seneca, South Carolina.
And we also have Ronda Taylor, who is earned her Master's of Arts in Writing and BA in English from Coastal Carolina University, and she was a grad assistant. We are very fortunate to have her within the Athenaeum Press. She's a poet and a workshop leader based in Charleston, South Carolina.
And last but not least, we have Theresa Calabrese. She graduated in 2017 with a Bachelor of Arts degree in graphic design. She is currently at Jack Porter. They're an environmental design firm based in Greenville, South Carolina.
Thanks everybody for joining us today. So we had just a kind of first question to kick things off. You all have come from such a variety of experiences at Coastal Carolina University. And, we are just really interested in thinking about and listening to what kind of made the press stand out. Each of you kind of came, as we were talking before we went live, at different points in your academic career. And so we just wanted to know what made the press stand out. What were some of the challenges that you faced while a press student? What were some of the successes?
Who wants to go first?
I'll go first. I'm fine going first.
Elder.
The elder, I'll go first. I know for me, one of the things that really stood out about the press is and this might just be a personal experience with school, but I always thought of it as kind of monotonous. There was like this game that was being played, at least in my head, as classwork, as these kind of obstacles you're overcoming. You have very known players, the professor, and you as the student, and a very clear objective, which is to get the best grade you can. And it was kind of this game that I always played in my head of sacrificing a piece here to get more of an advantage here, that kind of thing. And that's how I always thought about school. It was like the system I was overcoming. And the press kind of broke that up in a very shocking way. One, because you're working in a group with a bunch of different people who have different ideas, who have different belief systems and different thoughts about the creative endeavor we're embarking on. But also the idea of working on a project that you're passionate about and completing that project that people are going to see was something that was completely new to me. And especially in my college career, right? Most of the work you did was for that very specific reason. And then once it was done, you never thought about it again. But this was the first time I ever worked on a project where I really had this desire for it to be the best it could be. And trying to finish it at a certain time and learning that lesson of you accept what you made, even if there's things that you know that you wish you could go back. And I think that's true for every project. Every project I've worked on since graduating from Coastal, I wish I could touch it again, but you can't because it's out there and for the public. So that to me was one of the main things that stood out to me about the press.
Anybody else want to follow up?
I think the same for me. You become so invested in the project, you become very passionate about it. So there's that part. And then I think the shocker for me was just how immersive the learning experience was. Like we're really, really taking it all on and we're really in there. And for me, community was really big. So to be able to talk to people and the voices of the project were really important to be able to connect in that way. So community. And then I think the challenge, but also success, was working across disciplines. So you're learning the language of a skill set beyond your own. So like I'm kind of getting the understanding of how the brain works when it comes to graphic design or other parts. And so it can be challenging, but when it all comes together, it creates this beautiful project. And so I think that was my experience and what I learned from it.
Shonte, you were shaking your head. I'd love to hear from you.
I think both of them really like hit the nail on the head. It was a really great experience to be able to kind of get together with not even your peers, just like, I don't want to call them random people, but people from across disciplines who don't really see the world the way that you do. So you all bring a very like valuable insight to the project, and being able to communicate with them and being like, oh, well, this means this. I remember working on the Trans South project and working with the graphic designers and having no idea what they were really talking about. But I was like, oh, my sister is a graphic designer, so maybe this means this. And so I get to figure out a little bit of her world and their world and like see it in a way that I really, as like a humanities background, would never have realized, because I work with words rather than like lines and like font faces and all these different like terms that are not useless to me, but they don't pertain to my specific area. So I thought it was really like enriching to be able to kind of mingle with those people and be able to feel comfortable with them and talking to them and like just bringing what you have to the table and having it be valuable was also a really great experience. So I think just being able to work with people who have nothing to do with you is like peak.
I'm going to jump off this question a little bit, and this is for Theresa. I know when you started with the press, you jumped in on one small project, and you were a small component of that project that kind of grew, and then you ended up taking on your own, more of the reins of a different project. How was that experience, that learning experience at the beginning? Because I believe, if I remember correctly, you were part of the War on Two Fronts,
Yeah.
The actual install and everything, and then you started becoming part of then the traveling exhibit and pieces of that. Can you explain a little bit about that?
Yeah, I think, I jumped into the Athenaeum Press when I was a sophomore, and that's pretty young for most students that begin with this program. But I think what was great about it was I got to kind of take a supporting role to senior designers and more experienced students, and watch the dynamic and learn from that before I kind of jumped in with the traveling exhibit. By that point, I had kind of gotten an understanding of working with people from different disciplines. I really got to understand the story well and the purpose and mission of this particular project, because we had discussed it over a year and had been working towards the physical exhibit. So there were a lot of team dynamics I had learned about at that point. And then design wise, we had kind of at that point, like all of the main points in the story were cliff noted in my mind. So doing that traveling exhibit was much easier than someone who'd have to go and relearn all of the content that we started with. But following it through, I think was so beneficial. There were so many different phases, from figuring out what the story is to designing for the content. And then, the installation part. There were just so many parts of that phase that were hurdles that we overcame as a team. So that was a lot of fun, a lot of learning.
And then Drew, I want to talk a little bit about your project. I know that there was a lot of back and forth and what that project was going to end up becoming. Can you speak a little bit about that and your experience in developing what the end result ended up being?
Yeah, definitely. Something I was going to bring up with answering the first question was the openness of the press to support whatever vehicle that we felt was the best way to tell a story and have impact in the community and the audience who was receiving the content. And so the development of like the homelessness project ended up primarily becoming the book that we put together at the end, but there was a lot of other components that happened throughout our journey that went into the book to bring it to life. One of those being public interactive wall installations, which was the first experience that I had with something of that size and that scale, as well as understanding a budget and what you can do within design and how big you can go and how interactive you can be with those resources. And so we did public interactive wall installations that called to action people's preconceived ideas of what homelessness was or how they perceived homeless people. And then those photos and the collection of information from those moments went into the book. And then to bring in the digital piece, we put together the episodic web series so that people who didn't have access to purchasing the book could still visit the website and learn about the story and hear from the voices of the people, which I think helped people not only like read and understand the story, but like feel the story, because then you heard the voices behind the words that were written in the book. So there was, I think with all the press projects, there's an openness from the team and the faculty that leads it, as well as the students that come in to support whatever means necessary to bring the story to life, which I think was really fun. And that was like one of the first moments that I kind of got exposed to that openness, and lucky enough to continue to work in that realm now. So
Great, thank you.
Absolutely. And I mean, Drew and kind of Rhonda, we actually we're getting some questions in from Facebook and YouTube as well. So thank you guys, keep them coming. So this next question, I'm going to kind of like tie in a little bit with things that you guys just mentioned in terms of that community engagement. So in terms of that local and and you both kind of mentioned in terms of community, and this I think applies to a lot of the work, also, Nick and Theresa, that you guys do as well. Could you talk about, it's like what that means, like what that meant for you in your particular project, like how it was to engage with community and how you defined the community that you were engaging with, and maybe some of the challenges or exciting experiences that were associated with that?
Yeah, sure. I'll jump in and just say, like, I'm not originally from South Carolina and the Myrtle Beach area specifically. So with our project being localized in that area, it was interesting for me because I also had to integrate myself with the community. And I think that helped me bring a perspective, an outside perspective, to not everyone who's going to experience the story or read the book or watch the videos or write on those walls is going to be from this area. And I think engaging with the community helps put into perspective that specific concept for someone who's not from there. So homelessness happens, for our project specifically, like homelessness happens all across the world and all across the country in different cities, and in every different area, city, state, country, it happens for a various number of reasons. And all of those reasons combined create those stereotypes. But we found very interesting reasons why people, like very special and unique reasons why people were particularly homeless in the Myrtle Beach area that weren't lining up to the stereotypes that you would find in a larger city around the country. And so for us in the homeless project, it was important to bring the community in and say, here's a story, or here's something that you've experienced in your life, but it's different here, and this is why it's different, and this is how we can help overcome some of those preconceived ideas, and also share the voices and the stories of the families and the people affected by it, because there's a lot of people in the area that are not too far away from that happening to them. So
Absolutely.
yeah.
No, and I think that kind of like area specificity is really interesting. And Rhonda, I was wondering, you worked on all three of the projects that we've done on African American and Black communities in the Gullah Geechee corridor. And so I was wondering if you could talk a little bit about that progression.
So I worked on Gullah, the Voice of the Island, Gullah, the Voice of an Island, then at Low Tide with Sandy Island. And that first project, Gullah, the Voice of the Island, was at St. Helena Island. It was really good to be able to connect and hear and highlight their voices. So I think about like Miss Minnie Gasson and Mr. James Smalls. Like they're such cool people who have so much to offer when it came to like spirituals and just their culture and history and where they're going and that resilience. And I think it was just important to connect with that, be invested in that, and it be a partnership. And it didn't feel like just trying to take that story and make it something, but really understanding that history, understanding that culture, and making sure that those voices are highlighted. So it was really cool to go and to be in those spaces and to create just a good connection because it they didn't have to share or any of that stuff, but it's just building that bridge and making sure preserve that history and things like that. So I think community was really big for me when it came to that and reflecting that in the work.
That's amazing. Nick, if I can offer, in terms of in terms of the work that you've done in Seneca with both the Bertha Lee Strickland Museum as well as the Lenny Museum, how did that experience in terms of War on Two Fronts kind of fill in that kind of community engaged work?
Yeah, I think to me, it's one of the most vital aspects of any type of interpretive work that you're doing, is actually engaging with the community in letting their voices tell their own story. And it's one of the things that the press did really well, I think, was teach me personally how to engage with that, with an individual's experience as you're interweaving it into a larger narrative. So in my career at the moment, I kind of have continued doing that process when designing museum exhibits. But I can remember a moment when we were working on a War on Two Fronts, and it was our first opportunity to actually engage with some of these veterans who fought during World War II. And that was my first realization that, when you're telling stories or you're designing for people, these types of interactive experiences that are telling a narrative in history, that there's actually an individual tied to those stories, and that's more than just these kind of streams of facts that can be woven into some sort of narrative that is educational to some people. And I kind of use that experience every day now. Part of what we do is go out into the community and get oral histories and build those narratives using individual stories, and go back to the community and check, is this mapping onto what you think about? Is this an accurate version of your story? And always remembering that tie instead of just removing it from the community.
Thank you for that. And Theresa, I saw you nodding a lot in terms of the communities that you engage with. So would you mind telling a little bit about that press translation into your career?
Yeah, definitely. I think when we were working on the War on Two Fronts project, we spent a lot of time talking about the story and trying to figure out what that storyline and path would be, because there were so many of them. Dr. Morehouse had given us so much research, so many audio clips, and so many stories that we all kind of watched and were attached to and wanted to, take to the hilltop and share with the whole world. And it was so hard to curate those into any kind of medium, a book, a museum exhibit. Like, we just wanted to tell all of them. So that was kind of the first time that I had this really latched onto the idea of how important the stories were, the content was. And being a designer, that is most important, is what is your message and why is it? And then everything else follows. And so, we do that at Jack Porter. Is the story is the most important to us. That's what makes all of our projects different. So we could be working on something for Notre Dame, and they have a different story than University of Tennessee. And we want our audience to know that. And so I think with War on Two Fronts, like, it was the same thing. Is we wanted to share these stories, and we only have less than 30 seconds with people's attention spans. So trying to get, all this passion and life experience to an audience that quickly, we were also passionate about. And I think, in my field, it's the same, at least here in Jack Porter, and it sounds like the rest of the panel here too.
Great. I want to change gears a little bit. And our alumni in the press keeps growing year after year. We have groups and groups that jump on a new project. So I would love to hear, what kind of advice would you have for students that are beginning to work for, or those that are interested for working for the press? What kind of advice could you give them? Something that you wish you would have known right when you first started.
I can answer that, unless anyone else wants to go. But as I think the baby of the panel who just graduated, I think the hardest thing is to actually kind of show up and be present, and not trying to downplay yourself. I think when there's a group, people tend to kind of take a less intense approach to participating and making sure that their ideas are heard, and wanting to have make their mark on the project and just being a part of it. Where being a supporting player is really important. I think it's also important to make sure that you know that your insights are valuable, even if it's the smallest thing. Or I remember working with the Trans South project, me and another press member, Josh, we were always we had the mediator type personality. So we would always be like, what does this mean for the audience? Or how was the audience relate to this? Or how would people interpret this? And it was just like something that, you know, we would keep egging on it. And it's important that you have all these different types of personalities in order to make the project as like, I guess like diverse and heartfelt as possible. I think it's important that you kind of know that you're just as valuable as everyone else at the table and kind of put yourself at a, you know, just be in the mix, if that makes sense.
Yeah, absolutely.
I'd love to add on to that real quick.
Please.
I think what the press provides for students, am I frozen or am I good to go? Okay, sorry. I think what the press provides is really one of the first experiences or moments or opportunities for students to work with a group of people that are diverse in thought and coming from different areas of education and experience. As a graphic designer and a lot of other programs, like when you get assigned a project, you work with other peers of your same major, but you don't often cross-pollinate with the other majors or the other key component players that you would experience in a real life situation. So it was definitely the first moment in my college career that you start working with other photographers, or you start working with copywriters, or you start working with project managers. And when you graduate and you move on and pursue your professional career, your teams aren't going to be only the people that bring your same skill set, but they're going to be people that work across the business and can bring it to life in different ways. And so I think it's really an amazing moment to help students open their mind and their eyes to how cross-pollinated teams will become like in their actual career, and it can prepare you for those moments, so you know how to interact and know how to engage with those people that aren't always in your field.
Nick, I'd love to hear from you. I gotta make sure I'm always on mute. I keep gonna. I'd love to hear from you because you know your major and your background is a little different, and I'd love to hear what how you got in part of that, and what types of things you can instill in new people coming on.
Yeah, and this is very much in line with what everyone else said, and I think it's one of the best things about the press is you really need to be prepared to be challenged and to be uncomfortable. And I know that does sound like a negative, but I promise you it is a positive. Because when you're working with the press, it's the first time you're going to be working in a group. It's the first time you're going to be producing probably a final product for the public. It's probably the first time you're working with materials you've never worked with. And also you're going to be working with, you know, subject matters and stories that may challenge you, whether it's your worldview, whether it is, you know, some of your beliefs. And it's important to understand that when you're telling people's stories or when you're interacting with other individuals, that there is another person that you're impacting with what your actions are. So coming from philosophy, I was always challenged, right? Because you're learning about, you know, things that, you know, challenge what your beliefs are, you're growing. But it was always in this argumentative give-take form. Whereas, you know, dealing with the anxiety of someone viewing your work for the first time, that's a different type of struggle that you have to get comfortable with. Or if you're having debates with individuals, I think I seem to remember this. I feel like we talked for an hour once with A War on Two Fronts about whether people turn left or right.
Yes, we did. Yes.
So, and we had a long, engaged conversation about that. So just understanding that maybe your perspective, because I feel like I was the oddball in that conversation. Like when I go into a space, I always turn the opposite way, I guess, of most people. So even small things like that, being able to sit there and accept the fact that your perspective on the world is a perspective. It's not a factual implication of what's happening. And the thing that I would honestly recommend, it's a great feeling. I live being uncomfortable now. That's kind of what my job is, to be honest, if I had to break it down into a feeling. But be prepared to challenge yourself and be uncomfortable.
And then Theresa, you said earlier that you started as a sophomore, which is a fairly young in your college career to start with the press, because we're working on these big projects. What advice would you give to a freshman or a sophomore to make them a little more comfortable being a part of these projects and have a voice in them?
Yeah, I think, when I started with the press, I think I made myself also take a back seat role, and I was a lot more quieter, and I was just an observer because there were people that were more experienced in the room, and I just wanted to listen to them, which was very helpful. I think that is a great response. But I also think there are times where just being adaptable is going to be helpful. There were moments where it was very important for me to share my experiences on the design side and what I was thinking and contributing to that. And it was a little like, it gave me a little bit of anxiety sharing, when I don't have as much experience. But I think when I started sharing and asking questions, I was starting to get answers that I wouldn't have if I just sat in the back of the room and let everybody, figure everything else out. So I think if you're coming in, and feel, I think just making sure that you're taking a seat at the table too, and asking those questions. And, even though you might get eye rolls or something, if you might, get a silly, if you ask, a question that everybody thinks is silly, but I kind of live my life asking a million questions. And it's something that my boss told me today that he appreciates. So I guess that's working for me. But, it helps me keep on top of things. And I learn a lot quicker that way, instead of, just assuming things and messing it up. So when you're joining the press, I would highly recommend to be willing to put yourself out there a little bit and ask questions, because you'll just learn from that.
Wonderful.
Oh, can I add something?
Please.
I also came onto the press as a sophomore. I don't even remember how, but yeah, it's like early gang. But it's at first it was kind of me just participating, but not really. There's a difference between participating and being in the mix and then taking ownership. I feel like it's that step further. So when you are able to, ask questions and not be afraid to, get those eye rolls or be like, here she go again, like she don't know what anybody's talking about. Being able to, lead the conversation and turn it into a different direction and introduce a turning point and just kind of like be like, okay, what are we talking about? Like, can we backtrack? I've lost, like, being able to have those experiences and be comfortable in doing that really gives you a different type of like pride. When you take pride in your work, you take ownership and you say, this is my project as much as everyone else. I think it really gives you a different type of like self-efficacy that like you can do this and you can participate and you can influence and that your influence is also a good thing and it's not just you kind of messing things up or meddling or something, but this is also your project. So I think having those feelings and learning how to kind of shoulder that responsibility of being a team member early is very important. So I see any freshman or sophomore or whoever like not used to being and working in those interdisciplinary environments, that would be like your first kind of challenge, is to say like, this is my project. So like to unlock your full potential as a team member.
Absolutely. And I mean, and kind of like pinging on that. So I just wanted to share a quick comment from the Facebook stream from Dr. Morehouse of that faculty mentors. And I think that Scott and I both really agree with this, is that we learn the most from you guys. And so this next question actually is part of that learning, to learn from you all, because I think that you each have really amazing careers. And Rhonda, I'm looking particularly at you, that you worked as both an editor and a content creator and a copywriter in all of the projects that you were, and also in your work as a graduate assistant. And then you've also gone on to do some really amazing work in terms of spoken poetry, and performance and workshops. And like every time I see you pre-pandemic, you're in like another city, like meeting somebody really cool. And so I was wondering if you could share, and the same question is gonna come to you guys in each little different bits, but if you could share something that you've learned that you didn't learn while you were at Coastal, that we should teach, or that you wish that we had taught in the press experience. Does that make sense? So like something that you've learned that we could help.
Yeah. Man, that's a challenging question. I think for me, when I graduated, that whole immersive learning thing, I went straight into it, which I think the Athenaeum Press kind of gave me that. But like, because I do, pursue poetry, because I pursue children's literature, I just went like straight into it. Like I invested, I went to, like you said, I'm going everywhere. I go to conferences, I go to retreats, I put myself in those spaces and immerse myself to learn as much as possible, to connect with every author, every editor, every person in that publishing industry, so I can really learn how to strengthen and master my craft. So for me, it really is, I have to immerse myself. So when I pursue my poetry, I put myself in the front, like on the stage, and it creates outcomes, it creates opportunities. And that's kind of crazy for me just because I'm so introverted, and I would prefer to stay in the background. But you have to immerse yourself. And then I think the Athenaeum Press kind of helped me with that, because it's like what they were saying, like you have to be at the forefront. You have to make sure your voice is heard. You have something valuable to add. And so I think that kind of answers it. I just wish I had did more of that. And I did a lot of that. I just dived right into it after graduating, when I should have did a lot more of that.
No, absolutely. And kind of like forcing people to, right?
Yeah.
So Theresa, what about you?
Yeah, I mean, I think that, again, like I had more confidence after college to start asking questions. And I kind of wish that I mean, college is weird for everybody. It's a very confusing time and it's just really hard. But, I wish that I had just known that like, it's okay to ask questions and dive into the project. I think I held myself back a little bit because I felt like it was everybody else's project. But, I think that was not doing me a service, and then it's not doing the team a service either, which we have talked about before. I was in that room for a reason, and it was to be a contributor. And I think that everyone should know that their thoughts and feelings about a project are so important to how it's going to be molded and be shared with the community. So I think that's what I believe now in the work that I do, which has made my work so much more enjoyable, and a lot less, a lot less anxiety about it. But, I think that was something that young Theresa should have known.
Oh, so I'm hearing that we just need to like keep pushing you guys to like just be, it's like, no, it's all you, right? So Drew, you were kind of in this really great situation too, where you were an intern it's like while you were kind of finishing, like you had wrapped up the press project and then you went directly on as this intern. And so, after leaving the undergraduate world, what are some of the like skills that you've picked up or tips that you've picked up that we could kind of integrate back into the curriculum?
Yeah, something is actually kind of similar to what Theresa was talking about. And I had at the end of my internship, I hadn't known that I was going to work remotely with the team. So I did an internship with the digital design team and the store design team. And they treated the interns there as complete contributors. So work that I was doing was going out into the world on the website in different parts of the world. And I remember having one of these last kind of follow-up meetings with one of the senior designers of the group I was working with. And I said, how am I supposed to do schoolwork right now? Like, I was just working on some things that are public. Right before I entered this internship, I worked on the press project, like that went public. So how do I, I want to make sure I take this seriously, but like, how do I go back to schoolwork kind of thing? And he had a pretty good piece of advice that, I try to carry in through my thought process now even. And it's like, when you're in school, like, you can do whatever you want. You can push the boundary as far as you want to take it, and you're going to get out as much as you put in kind of thing. Whereas a lot of people, they can be held back when they get into a career. They might have these plans or these ideas, but you know, you might be told to stay in your lane in the beginning, right? Or something like that. Luckily, I wasn't told that, but like when I started working remotely as I was back at school, I was just creating graphics for like emails and things like that, which is not the most exciting thing that I've been able to work on at Converse. Still exciting, but it's a lot of translation design. So you're not really providing your unique point of view. And so he said, like, when you go back, like, if you get a project, do whatever you want and push the boundary as far as you can. And so I think even when you do get into situations where you feel like you can, I think it's still important to bring that perspective. And so when I came back and did my 5th year, there was, you know, I had some moments where I was working on projects, or I was revisiting old projects or old ideas. And I was able to push them farther because of just that unlock in my mind. And then after that internship, like I was fortunate to join a unique position as the global communication designer. And I had a lot of creative freedom, which doesn't always happen. And so it was kind of interesting because I got thrown into one place where you don't really have much creative freedom. You're translating the design direction that's trickled down. And then I got thrown into basically having all the creative freedom you can for this specific project, whatever. And so like sometimes if you have too many options, you don't know where to start. And so I think like something, yeah, I guess like something that I wish I knew before the press project and going into it and before the internship and stuff is like always continue to push the boundaries, because you are still molding your craft there, and you're not going to get fired for having a bad idea. You know, I mean, you're not going to get fired for having a bad idea in your career, but like you don't have to pay the consequences or anything when you're in school. You can really push it, and then you might find something amazing, and that's what makes you unique next to the same person. And I think like I don't like taking traditional tracks, and the Athenaeum Press is like one of those moments where it pulls you out of a traditional track of any other student. You know, it's not your normal class schedule work, where when you bring your portfolio up to someone in you know, that you're applying to a job to, and you have 2 people applying from Coastal at the same role, same thing, like you're going to have more projects, you're going to have more experience to bring to the table just because of this one opportunity. And that opportunity can then blossom into a lot of things that open up for you. So
That's awesome. And I really love this like kind of theme that's like running through each of your answers, and especially like I think Drew, you kind of really brought it home of pushing everything like to the absolute max, and having the courage, right? You know, it's like courage is such, you know, we oftentimes, I don't know, Scott may think differently, but I like come to the first day often of a press meeting and I look at you guys and I'm like, you guys have so much confidence. Like if I was in this room as like an undergraduate, I would want to like crawl under a rock right now. But like you guys like carry yourselves and have such like really amazing ideas. And I love hearing that, you know, it's like that you guys didn't recognize about a little bit about yourself until like you either came back to college, you know, came back into the educational experience or left it, you know, it's like into the real world.
yeah, I think one line of advice I like to tell people now, after a few years, is you don't know unless you ask, and you don't know unless you try. And the worst thing someone can say is no. So those kind of 3 things is kind of what drives what I try to do. And especially now in the innovation work stuff, but it's like, you don't know unless you try it. You have to test it, see if it works. And if it doesn't, like fix it and try it again. Or if you ask something and someone thinks it's crazy, like if they say no, you're going to be in the same spot you were when you started. So why not try? So
Absolutely. And
Yeah.
Nick, I'm remembering as I was trying to find a headshot for you, I was looking through all these photos of you like trying these really crazy things at the Bertha Lee Strickland Museum of like, you know, circuit boards and like all sorts of things. So I'm curious, kind of tracing back to our original question of, you know, what have you learned since doing this kind of series of uncomfortability projects and creating exhibitions that you wish that you had known or that we had that you had learned while in college?
I know for me personally, I wish I would have known that that I can be creative. I mean, I always had this idea working, like when you do a lot of essay writing, which is the kind of foundation work of history and philosophy in classrooms, right? I didn't understand really how to be creative, or if I could be creative. Like I would sit there and watch, like, Theresa too, by Colin and Erica, and they would create all these like amazing things, and I'd be around all these people making these like beautiful works, and I would sit back and be like, I can write a paper. And I didn't understand like the creativity involved with that, or like what kind of thought processes you're using to kind of synthesize that information. And there is kind of like this unique beauty to how you kind of synthesize those words. And so me personally, I wish I would have known that while I was there, that kind of creative expression can be utilized in a bunch of different disciplines. It's not just limited to your own. You may understand the rule sets better of the discipline you work in, but that sort of humanities driven creative thought process can be applicable to a bunch of different things in your life. And for me, I guess now I design circuit boards for sound interactives and create graphics and things I never thought I would do. I mean, that's not something I ever imagined myself doing. But I don't know if this is like a one-day intervention thing that the press should do with every new class, but I've gotten a lot better at communicating with a group, which I think is also a theme that's kind of run through everybody. This idea that I was terrified to say anything. I would just sit and just listen, and maybe every now and then I would say a word. But I've learned to express my opinion and see value in what my thoughts are, and not to the extent where I'm not okay with those thoughts being shot down. I think one of the big lessons, especially with Trisha there, was this idea of this editorial aspect of, you may have an idea, you may have these thoughts, you may have written this piece, but that doesn't mean that it's going to make it into the final project. And I think the press does a great job of teaching that, but coincided with that idea of communicating those ideas to the group and being confident in those ideas.
I'm going to go back to when this question originally started, and agree with Alli and Dr. Morehouse that we learn a lot from our students. And I keep going back to, and I believe it was Shonte, was doing some unique things with technology that I had absolutely no clue what she was doing. So I had to have her sit down and actually explain it to me and take me through every step, because it was new to me. And one of the unique things that the press does, and I hope everybody would agree with this, is there is no, we're not going to set out what the vehicle is to communicate. We're going to say, let's explore the subject matter and develop what the actual communication piece is going to be, and use any type of technology, even if we don't know it, to be able to explain that. Shonte, I'm going to step here. I'm going to go on a little tangent. I wanted you to explain a little bit of what you were doing in that project and how that was different. It wasn't something that was done at the press yet.
So just to give some background, I worked on the Trans-South project, and we needed a digital component because half of the press is you have a kind of book or written or analog component, and then you have a digital. And so I wanted to make a game because that's what I do. I'm a game maker or game designer, and I thought it would be really like interesting to have this kind of virtual walkthrough or a virtual kind of undertaking of the trans experience with space, like spaces and like the space around us and environments and like banal everyday to day locations. So I made a kind of serious game based off of some e-literature pieces that I really enjoyed. And it was kind of funny because when I introduced it to Alli, she was just like, yep, do that. And I was like, okay, I guess I'll do it. And it was really interesting to be able to just kind of make that for the press and have that be the digital component, and like nobody else was working on it because it was kind of just me. But it was really kind of terrifying to have that much influence over a part of the project. And I don't even know if I'm answering your question, but Yeah, hold on. Let me, before I get on a tangent, can you reiterate the question to me?
No, I was, it's interesting. And I think somebody else can jump in here is like, you come into the project with one conception, like this is what we're going to do. And then it takes a complete 180. And it ends up being something that you never ever dreamed of. Can somebody like speak to one of their projects they worked on that might have happened?
I can speak to that, I think. When we started with The War on Two Fronts, I think most of us had it in our head that it was just going to be a book. At least on the design side, we were like, it's going to be a book. It's going to be so fine. But then once we started to dive into the content and just love the stories, we were like, this is going to be like a Webster's Dictionary size book. There are too many stories. And also it wasn't the best way to share them. And there's an attribute that we really love in Jack Porter is being a MacGyver. And I feel like that's the Athenaeum Press, is like figuring out, being resourceful and figuring out how to build this. Like we're students, and I don't know Scott and Alli's background in complete depth, but I'm not quite sure that they had the experience of building a museum exhibit as 100% professionals have all the answers. So we did a lot of research, and we brought in other alumni to talk about museum exhibits and how to tell those stories. And that's not something we thought we were going to do. And then of course we thought we were done, and then we were like, well, we need a traveling exhibit, and we need a book. But in the beginning, we just thought it was going to be one book, and that was it. And we had to just fight for this story and figure out how to make it work and how to make people listen and love the stories as much as we did.
Wonderful. And I think, Drew, the homeless project took many turns along the way. If I remember correctly, in one day, it took like 3 turns. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, I think honestly, like from my preconceived idea of what the press did was I was going into it as like, oh, we're doing a book as well, which is kind of interesting because when you think of press, you think of in printing press or whatever. And I had seen or heard about some books going through that project and that press before. So we kind of were going through it, and it did take a lot of turns. I think at first we were like, oh yeah, there's going to be a magazine or a book thing, but then we had so much photographic content. We're like, oh, it's going to be a photo book. And then we started to interview people. And it did flip so many times with bringing in the episodic series and interviewing people and filming people and going through that thinking process of how to bring that to life with getting sign off on who we can film and where we can film and when we can film and all that kind of stuff. And then even the installations, like, I'm not even sure the exact process on what led to that really, but I think it was just one of those moments where you have an idea to try to engage with the community. And I think part of our research was there's so many preconceived ideas. So how do we get a collection, and how do we get some type of understanding of what people think? And that's where that turned. And then it was like, how many do we do? What size are they? When are they going to show up? Where are they going to show up? And it was like, there's a lot of these decisions and a lot of the research that goes into figuring out what it's going to be. So I think it's amazing that the press pushes that it doesn't need it, that it has to have a digital and a physical component, and one component needs to sell, but that's not the only thing. Like, I think what makes all of our projects unique that we worked on was there's not just one single item. There's not just one avenue or one vehicle to tell the story. There are multiple touch points. So if you remember that day where it turned 3 times, I would love to hear it. I can't remember, but I remember it turned a lot. Like the first half of the year felt like a year had already passed. But
Wonderful. Well, we only have a couple minutes left, and I'm sure everybody wants to know what you guys are doing now. We know where you're working, but we'd love to hear some of the projects you're working on, and really is like how how that maybe, your experiences, your entire time at Coastal Carolina University may be influencing what you're doing currently. So Nick, I know, let's talk, I'm going to ask you first because you're in a unique space. Before we went on, you were telling me you were doing podcasts, and I'd love to hear more about that.
Yeah, the coronavirus pandemic has kind of rocked a lot of different industries, but museums are definitely up on that list. So the London Museum is a historic house museum, and that's the one I manage daily operations of. And because it's a historic house museum, it's full of artifacts, which means I can't just go around spraying Lysol everywhere. So we have to remain closed, which I'm fortunate that we can do that. So we've had to try to transition all of our content, whether it's from the London Museum or the Bertha Lee Strickland Cultural Museum, to a digital platform. So we're currently building a centralized website under the Seneca City Museums banner. So it's senecacitymuseums.org. And we're trying to do a lot more virtual content. So video series, podcasts, whatever we can do to kind of get the community story up and active, for whether it's local community members to engage with certain things or to try to attract a broader audience and kind of tell the story of our area. And other than that, I'm actually really excited. Dr. Ronda Thomas at Clemson University is working on an amazing project called Call My Name, to tell the story of African Americans and their relationship to Clemson University and the broader Clemson area. And I'm happy that that project just recently got funded by a very, very large grant. And I'm excited to work on that project as a creative director. So a lot of good things in the works. A lot of things got paused because of the coronavirus, but still excited and happy with what I'm doing.
And then Rhonda, I'd love to hear what you're doing. I didn't follow you that much after your graduation, but it's lovely to hear, and I read your bio about how a lot of poetry and storytelling. Tell us a little more about that.
So I'm definitely a creative. So everything I pursue is creativity. So I pursue poetry, kind of like Alli was saying, performing poetry at conferences and events. So I do that part. And then I'm really passionate about children's literature and picture books. So kind of doing that and reflecting community and voices that matter to me. So that's like my personal journey. And then something that I've really been proud to do over these couple of years is I'm the co-founder of an organization called Flybara, FLYBARA. And it's through my church, but it's a creative organization. So like we create creative events, workshops, just tools to like kind of equip and empower like these diverse group of creatives to create this community to like display their craft, but also strengthen their craft. So yeah, that's a couple of things that I'm doing. All of it's creative. So.
Wonderful. And then Theresa, you're up in Jack Porter up in Greenville.
Yeah.
I'd love to hear some of the stuff and kind of give a little bit of background what Jack Porter is, because it's kind of, the name doesn't really ring a bell with everybody.
Yeah. So, environmental design or experience design are the two kind of ways that are briefly describing this field, but it's very vast. So I don't think those words sum it up. So at Jack Porter, we design environments and experiences for college athletic programs. And really, the point is to help coaches and other leaders in athletics figure out what their recruiting path is and what their brand story is, and display that in a way that when recruits and donors and fans walk into this experience, they get the story and they feel as connected to the story as the program hopes. And so here we are working on a project. We just have been working with West Virginia University on their new football operations center, and it's beautiful architecture. And what's fun about my job as a graphic designer is like I get to work with these architects So I know a little bit about architecture now, and I can like kind of keep up with those conversations, which is really fun. But also, you know, I'm a traditional designer. I help design graphics and those kinds of things. But then, you know, some of my projects have extended into a little bit of interior design and helping pick out carpet and furniture. So what I get to do is just very vast and not anything that I was formally kind of trained in school. You know, besides graphic design, I never took a class on interior design or engineering or architecture. But I think what the press had offered, you know, was a lot of experience design with the museum exhibit. And I could say that without that museum exhibit in my portfolio, I really don't know that Jack Porter would have looked at me at all without that experience. So that the press has really impacted exactly where I am today and wanted to be too.
Oh, that's great. That's great. And Shonte, tell us about your experience. Are any grad schools yet?
I'd say that just the biggest kind of influence is that the press really made me realize that I'm an agent, you know, and I have influence. So I'm going to grad school because I was like, I don't want to do what the job market has for me right now. It's really boring to me. So I'm going to go into game development so that I can actually do the jobs that I are actually very passionate for. And actually the press really made me realize that I love sitting in a team and just being in that atmosphere of like, I don't know what you're talking about, but yes, keep talking. Yeah, I love it. So just being in that interdisciplinary environment. And so I've just been looking at graduate school so that I can kind of pursue my passions in a way that I would be hesitant to before, because it seems kind of like a pipe dream, but it's like, it's not a pipe dream because you can just do stuff. And that's what the press really just taught me, is just do stuff. I can put that in more elegant terms, but really it's like the ability to do something and have confidence that you're able to do it is something that was really deeply imparted to me by Alli and everybody on the press. So I'm going to go to grad school, even though I really didn't want to before, but now I really do. And I miss being in a classroom. So I haven't cut the cord yet from academia. So.
Oh, that is great. And then Drew, I think you have the job that every young designer wants. You get to make things and play with things and develop things. Can you speak a little bit about that?
Yeah, I would definitely say I'm in a very unique position, and it's a dream job. It's definitely been amazing since I got to Converse, and I spent a year and a half on the global communications team as the global communications designer, and I had complete creative freedom over a lot of things that we were doing internally. Design a lot of different events, doing, like Theresa said, like you wear multiple hats when you get into some of these positions, and like so for event design, like I was working with doing interior design, choosing the venue, choosing the stage, the lighting, the color, the food, like all of these different kind of things, and got to do a lot of different branding projects. But recently I joined the innovation team as a concept creator. And so that team, it's a small team. There's only 2 of us right now. And my partner is focused on concept product design, and I'm focused on concept design communication. So a lot of what I'm doing right now is trying to bring together a more wholesome, like end-to-end story for product to marketing to consumer, and being the glue between those teams. And it seems very vague on how to do that, but there's a lot of exploration and a lot of fun that I get to do with future projects. So one of the recent things that I did was help lead the design language and the design communication and the branding and the storytelling for our spring and summer season for 2021. And so that influences all the product designers at Converse to use that to help them to design their product, whether it be apparel or footwear. And then the most recent thing that just came across, like as I got back from PTO this week, which I thought was funny. I was literally telling my manager this morning, I was like, I have this panel that I'm speaking on today, and it's kind of cool that this project came across because it falls very in line with what I'm doing. But 2 projects that are coming up, one is called the Design Ethos and one is the Design Channel. And so I am working to create a design platform for all of Converse to work and use as a tool to upload content, learn new tools, connect with one another, and all that kind of stuff. And that's the design channel. And the design ethos is basically a book of the design philosophy of Converse. So most brands have one of these, especially in footwear and apparel. But this is what the brand stands for, what we want to accomplish now and in the future. So working with all of the creative leadership team on that to pull content and tell that story and design that publication, which is now going to be a more interactive digital version. But yeah, I get to make a lot of stuff, and that's where that line of "you don't know unless you try" kind of comes into play for me almost every day. Is like, if you have an idea, just make it and show it, and it could happen. And so that's been really fun to help push the boundaries and for people to actually listen to some of the things that I'm doing. So it's been a dream.
That's amazing. I mean, you guys are all living, I think, like I'm going to just live vicariously through each of you. I have been. It's like, so I think that like part of like, you know, what the press is, we're kind of like a parasite in that we like just hold on to you for the rest of, you know, for the rest of time. So I'm just still so astounded, like just in reading your bios. We're going to post these on the Athenaeum Press website, ccu.press, as we hear from both you guys. Thank you guys so much for spending the time today, and some of your colleagues in the press. And so, but first, just thank you to Drew, Shonte, Ronda, Nick, and Theresa. You guys are superstars, and we are just so thrilled to have you guys. Thank you guys so much. So a little round of applause for you all.
Thank you, guys.
And thanks to everybody who tuned in. This is going to be archived on both YouTube and Facebook. And if you tune in next Thursday, you'll also hear from, we can claim her, the press alumni, Liz Kelly. And she's going to be talking to Dr. Matt White on next Thursday. But thank you guys again so much. If you're interested in the press, check us out at ccu.press or the Athenaeum Press on all the social media. And we'll talk to you guys soon. Thank you so much.
Yay.